Hello, everyone. Welcome to another CharacterStrong webinar. Today, we are talking about school culture and a few of our favorite conversations to impact school culture right away. As you're joining us, go ahead and drop your name and where you're watching from into the chat box. All those messages are private, so only I'm able to see those coming through, myself and the team, as we start to dig in here. Wait just one more moment so people can get settled in. Thanks for joining us on an early morning for some people. I'm here today in Chicago. The team is flying in. It's the SEL Exchange, the Social Emotional Learning Exchange, hosted by CASEL, the Collaborative for Academics and Social Emotional Learning, their first ever conference. So we as a team are here today to talk about school culture. So welcome everyone to a short conversation, rapid fire about school culture. And for those of you joining us now, I just want to let you know, if you stick around till the end, we're going to have some opportunities to give away some free training registrations to our CharacterStrong one-day educator trainings. So hang around live, and I'll share more about that at the end. Thanks for being here. We're talking about the top 3 tips for school culture change. This is sort of everything that we think about as an organization is how do we impact culture, culture being that foundational thing that we build everything else on our campuses and in our organizations. At CharacterStrong, we define culture as behavior. It comes from a James Hunter quote that goes like this: culture goes much deeper than a mission statement. Culture is how group members actually behave repeatedly and habitually. We love that quote because it reminds us that culture is more than a vision statement, more than our value words, more than what we hang up on our walls, more than the vision or the mission statement that we took a long time to write. Culture is actually behavior, students and staff. Every person in every organization is behaving in some kind of way. And as my friend Phil Boyd says, we either have a school culture by design or a school culture by default. You don't get to work your way out of a culture because people are always behaving, and those behaviors are going to impact the way that we feel. Those behaviors are going to impact the way that we're able to perform in the context of our academics and our social experience in school. And so culture, we believe, is the foundation upon which we build everything else, which is why we say this work is not another thing on the plate, it is the plate. So today we're going to talk about a few high leverage ideas and conversations that we believe impact school culture right away. This is the model that we use at CharacterStrong. Basically everything we do revolves around this because it's a simple framework for us to break down an otherwise very large concept of culture. Culture is this massive idea, so how do we break it down into something a little bit more manageable? Well, we call them the circles of culture. There's 3 of them. Number 1, clarity. What do people believe in or care about? Are we speaking a common language? Do we have a shared vision? If we don't have a shared vision, then we're all entering in different destinations to our Google Maps, which means we'll probably arrive somewhere, just doesn't guarantee it's at the same spot. Number 2, competence. What do people actually know how to do? We believe behavior is a skill. Social emotional behaviors are skills. Character traits are skills, meaning they are things that we can learn. And also meaning they are things we can teach. And that is a 2-sided coin. Are we equipping educators today with the skills to teach behavior and respond to behavior and cultivate the behaviors we want to see? And are we explicitly teaching the young people that we serve the behaviors that we want to see that create ultimately that culture? So what do people actually know how to do? And number 3, consistency. As my friend Caden Schmidt said, who is student body president, our senior president at Sumner High School, he says the role consistency plays in being a servant leader is astronomical. We believe that consistency is the foundation to character because consistency is what creates habits, and we think character is based on the habits you build for yourself. Things like your habits of kindness, your habits of patience, your habits of forgiveness are the things that cultivate and develop your character. So we will spend a little bit of time in each one of these 3 circles today with perhaps my favorite 3 conversations that we have in the context of each. So let's start here with clarity. Are we speaking a common language? So if you want to change culture, the first step we believe is we should define who the leaders are in the building. What is leadership? What is your paradigm of leadership at your school or in your organization? Because that's going to drive so much of everything else that you do. Paradigms are simply the perspective or the framework with which you view the world. And you would probably agree that our paradigms shape our behaviors. The way we think or see a thing is going to shape how we act with that thing. So how we define leadership is going to shape how we act in leadership. And at CharacterStrong, we operate from a few different definitions. The first one, on the highest level, we follow the lead of John Maxwell. Leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. Why is this a big deal? Well, they've done studies. They've tried to pull different definitions of leadership from all around the world to figure out what is like sort of the common ingredients. And what they realize is in just about every definition of leadership around the world, the word influence is either used or described. So John Maxwell takes it a step further. He says, leadership is simply influence, nothing more, nothing less. Good question there. Can influence be positive? Absolutely. Can influence also be a negative thing? Absolutely. Let's take it one step further with our favorite author, James Hunter. He says it's not a question of whether or not you are leading, which makes sense because if leadership is influence, it means that everyone has influence. It's not a question of whether or not you're leading. James Hunter would say, are you effective? Are you using it for good or for bad? I love that quote. It's my favorite thing we talk about at our 1 and 2 day educator trainings because it sets the stage for so very much. If we believe that leadership is influence, which is sort of the universal truth from every definition around the world, leadership is simply influence. It's a great reminder that everyone in every building is a leader. James Hunter would say, it's not a question of whether or not you're leading. It's only a question of, are you effective? And are you using that influence for positive or for negative? I think this is a critical question in the context of school culture because sometimes people look at leadership as those people in the positions of authority or power, which gives us the excuse when it comes to school culture that this is quote unquote not my job. Why? Well, because I'm not influential. I'm not a leader in my school, to which we would argue, no way. Every person is a leader. In fact, my guess is that sometimes in your school, the person with the most influence doesn't always have the biggest position or title. Take it a step further. Sometimes the people who are the most effective leaders aren't always using their leadership or their influence for good. I'm sure you know as well as I do that in any organization, sometimes the really effective leaders are negative. They're using their influence negatively and causing rifts or frustration within that organization, and they're really good at what they do. So having this common language around what leadership is, having this paradigm that leadership is influence, is a really big first step to shaping school culture. Why? Well, take the example of my co-founder, John Norlin, who was a social studies teacher by education, but never taught a formal social studies class at his high school because early on his principal caught the vision. And John was working with the student leadership group at the school, and the principal said, what if you did this all day long? So John, in his first year of teaching, started teaching 5 leadership classes a day at the high school level. Why? Well, the paradigm was if every person at this building is a leader, we better teach them to be effective. We better teach them to use that influence for good. So it started to become a tier 1 strategy at Sumner High School in many ways, where just about every 9th or 10th grade student would go through John's Principles of Leadership class. And at CharacterStrong, we say that leadership development is simply character development. And so he had 250 students a day navigating their way through this semester-long curriculum that was designed to teach about influence, to teach about servant leadership, to teach people the high leverage skills of being with people, those social emotional skills, those character traits that they would develop through an intentional character building process called the Character Dare. And I can imagine that you can imagine there was a tremendous amount of cultural change in the building. Why? Because if culture is behavior, and you're teaching those behaviors to 250 students a day, you're going to see culture shift. He did that for 10 years at the high school level and then went on to be at the district level as the program administrator for the whole child, a position that was literally invented for him to think about how this work operates K through 12 through that lens of like tier one. What are we doing for all staff, all students to support social emotional learning, leadership development, and character building? And as a result, they saw some really cool things happen. And that's when John and I came together to create CharacterStrong. If we could do it in a classroom at a school level, if we could do it at the district level, K-12, what does it look like to do this on a national or global level? To teach people that paradigm shift of leadership and then give them the practical tools to actually educate those leaders to be effective and to use their influence for good. I think it's also a great reminder that when it comes to culture change, we are first and foremost in the business of adult behavior change. So while we're working on those students through maybe a leadership program or an advisory program, we also need to be supporting our staff, which takes me to the next circle of culture and the next tip in creating school culture, which is competence. If you want to impact culture, monitor climate. So sometimes those words get pushed together, like the school culture and climate, or the culture and climate of a building. And I think it's important to note that they're actually distinct from each other. Culture, we say, is behavior. Climate is the byproduct of the attention we pay to those behaviors. Right? So when people behave like X, the feeling in a building is going to be Y. When you're seeing consistent behaviors of kindness, it's likely that the climate in the building is going to be one of safety or acceptance or belonging. Now, do we always get to have direct control over that climate? No, there's lots of things happening in students' lives, in staff lives, in the context of our world that shape the way people show up and feel every single day. But I also really like to be reminded of the premise that every single day when we show up to our school or our building, we're affected by that place. We're affected by that place because right when we walk in the doors, there are people around us, and those people are behaving in some kind of way, and those behaviors are going to shape the way we feel. They can't not. I also like to think about the idea of microclimates in a building. You might feel one way in the hallways and a very different way in the staff lounge, and a very different way in the cafeteria. And each one of those microclimates are decided by the behaviors in those spaces. So culture has a direct impact on climate, which to us at CharacterStrong presents an even bigger case to get really thoughtful and effective at how we approach that culture. So here's one practical tip. We call it the temperature check. It's one of our favorite strategies. In fact, it's one of our quote unquote serve staples. I'll talk about that more in just a minute. But we would call these the adult behavior practices in a building that we know in the highest leverage way are going to have an impact on culture. Right? If staff in the building do X, Y, and Z, we're going to statistically, from an evidence-based perspective and an anecdotal perspective, you're going to see some really beautiful things happen in your culture. So what are those adult behavior practices? Well, one of them would be the temperature check. This comes from Brian Slater, an educator in Washington State at the high school level. He's also a CharacterStrong presenter, goes in and does in-building professional development. He's really good and passionate at what he does. He came up with this really practical idea that once a week, instead of taking attendance himself, he would have students check in manually. So they would enter in their own name, which is required on the Google form. That's how he was doing it in a digital way. So the Google form, name, required. On a scale of 1 to 5, how are you doing today? Required. And the third question, why? Not required. Now, typically, Brian would then have a page break, so you'd hit next. So all of a sudden, Brian is starting to get this data on his computer. Meanwhile, on the next page, students had some sort of anticipatory set for the day or reflection question from yesterday, some sort of content-related material, while Brian had a chance to review not only attendance, but an emotional snapshot of his classroom. That data is incredibly powerful and deeply relational. Perhaps you can imagine some of the information that Brian would get inbound. And we always like to remind people that if you're going to use this strategy, you have to look at what's coming in, because you might find things like students checking in at a 1 for a whole lot of reasons. But those reasons are important. In fact, Brian has a number of stories of asking students to meet him in the hallway so he can check in on them, making sure they get the proper help that they might need from a counselor or someone else who can support their mental health. Why? Well, because if we don't provide an opportunity for students to check in at a 1, they might never tell us that they're at a 1. Brian uses this in a lot of really profound ways. Number one, obviously, is an empathy building strategy between him as the teacher and the students he serves. If 5 students check in at a 1 on any given day, does it change the way he teaches that day? You betcha. It better. Because if he knows that a number of students are struggling emotionally or mentally, their capacity to learn is diminished. So what do we have to do to address that? Not only that, but he's getting relational data on each one of those students as they check in, so he can know them better as human beings and check in with them in context of their academics, but also them as just people. I also love it because he uses it as an empathy building strategy with his classroom. What he does is before class begins, before like they get into the actual meat and potatoes of the day, he'll say, hey, as we're getting rolling, just want to let you know that 3 people today have checked in at a 1. It could be the person sitting next to you. Treat people accordingly. A really practical but high leverage strategy to get an emotional snapshot of your class. Why is this important? Well, the more you know about the climate of your classroom, the more you can impact culture by being thoughtful about the behaviors that you're cultivating, that you're demonstrating, and what you're teaching in your classroom to navigate that climate. Not only is this strategy a really beautiful thing to implement with students in your classrooms, we say at CharacterStrong, if we're coming in to measure fidelity of implementation, this would be something that every student should have at least 1 adult in the building giving them a temperature check a week. So once a week, 1 adult is caring enough to say, hey, how are you doing today? We believe it would be a good problem to have students say, you know, I had 5 teachers ask me how I am doing today. I had 5 teachers care about me today. That's a good problem. But from an implementation perspective, the idea would be every week, at least 1 adult is checking in with every student. How you doing 1 to 5? Not only does this work with students, but also a really powerful strategy with staff, as you might imagine. We've had administrators and counselors use this strategy with their staff during a PD day or an in-service day as a quick snapshot of how our staff is doing, because that is going to impact the way that we behave on a day-to-day basis as well. So take a moment and check in with yourself. For me personally, sometimes the 1 to 5 holistically feels a little bit big. So I actually like to break this down. And something we started to do at our 1 and 2 day educator trainings is when we have people pair up, if it's just you facing me, I can do a physical temperature check by holding up a number on my hand, right? 1 being low, 5 being high. So I'll give an example right now of how that'll play out categorically for a temperature check. So instead of just how are you 1 to 5, what if we were to break it down by category? So for example, how are you today physically? How are you today emotionally? How are you today mentally? How are you today in your job, in your life? A great activity that is a little bit vulnerable, but low risk in its categorical sharing. And then if you want, at the end of that activity, you can have the partners share 1 example of why they chose one of the numbers. So let's say I chose 3 for physically, which I did. I might share with you, if you're my partner, that over the past couple of days, I've been like really sore. And I'm not sure if it's because I'm starting to get sick or because I've started taking up a new form of exercise called acro yoga. I did it on Sunday and my body maybe just really isn't used to it. That paired with a lot of travel this week, my body hurts. And so while I'm physically not doing very well, emotionally and mentally, I'm doing really well, as I'm excited for what I'm sharing today. And I'm excited for this big conference here in Chicago. So a simple strategy that you could use and implement today with students or staff, get people in partners and have them give a temperature check for each of these categories. Or you can make up some of your own, or better yet, have your students make up the categories that they want to check in on. That's the temperature check. If you want to change culture, monitor climate, because that way the decisions you're making in terms of behavior change are rooted in the data of how students are feeling on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis. And the final tip for today, Related to the circle of culture consistency, what are we doing repeatedly and habitually? We say if we want to change culture, create champions. But what does that mean? People who are deeply invested in the work and role modeling what consistent behavior change looks like. These come in the form for us of our signature character dare process. The character dares are practical ways to put sometimes abstract ideas into real life consistent action. We believe that in education, the most precious resource we have is time. And when we get busy, when we get into the gauntlet of the year, it's nearly impossible to come up with new creative ideas. Which is why one of our goals as an organization is to be consistently providing low burden, high impact, practical resources for educators who are doing the work to go and implement things quickly and effectively. So our character dares, we have them as a part of our leadership curriculum. We have them as a part of our K through 5 curriculum. We have them as a part of our advisory curriculum. They're a staple of what we do when it comes to student-facing work, particularly at the secondary level. When we are talking about culture, though, it's not just student behavior, it's also staff, which is why we've been really excited over the past year to share our staff character dare. Staff character dares look something like this. This is one of my personal favorites. The student becomes the master, hand each student a note card and ask them to write down their name and one thing that they could teach you. Low burden strategy with a ton of relational impact. Why? Because now you have a library of data about things that your students are passionate about, many of which those things might not be anything related to school. Right? Students who might be passionate about hockey, but you don't have a hockey team. Students who might be passionate about card games or painting. And if those things aren't available in your school, you might never know that students are engaged in those things. And if at any point you need to establish a relationship with a student or restore a relationship with a student, you can go to that deck of cards and tap into something that you know immediately they are going to be passionate about. So a really low burden strategy doesn't take very much time, but in terms of the relational data you get and how you can use it, a really powerful strategy. We started with a 40-week staff character dare, which would be one just about for every week of the school year. Many times administrators will send this out in a newsletter or post it up in the staff lounge. Sometimes we've had staff members create a weekly group where staff get together and they talk about the dare. And we thought that it was so powerful and we saw so many cool stories coming out of it that we built a round 2. So we now have 80 weeks of staff character dares available for any staff who are passionate about bringing this social emotional learning, character development, relational work to life in their day-to-day work. But if we believe that everyone's involved in culture and everyone's a leader, including those ones that be more traditionally in a leadership position, well, we thought it would be important to also create an admin character dare. So we have 40 weeks of practical, proactive relationship building and culture strategies designed specifically for building administrators. It might look something like this. Staff chips. Purchase an inexpensive set of like poker chips and put each staff member's name on one. Each day, grab 3 to 5 chips and put them in your pocket. As you walk around the school, it is your goal to intentionally spend a couple extra moments connecting with those staff members in a non-evaluative manner. So the idea would be over the course of a week, a month, the goal would be to get through all of those staff members in the bag. And every time you take out a few and you are able to connect with those staff members, you separate them from the bag. So by the end of a month, the goal would be just a simple strategy to hold you accountable to that relational work over time. And of course, we believe at CharacterStrong that culture change is a holistic pursuit. So we got to get everyone involved, from students to staff to admins, all the way out into our community and our families. What critical work it is to make sure that whatever culture building you're doing in school, whatever character development you're doing in school, can be echoed at the home. Mother Teresa says, if you want to change the world, go home and love your family. So here's one of my favorite ideas from our new 40-week family character dare. Let's sit together as a family and see if you can brainstorm a list of 25 things you want to do together this year. Create the family bucket list. Get creative and collaborative. Make sure the items range from totally doable to something that might seem silly or impossible. So simple ideas on how to come together or connect as a family. And the premise of all of these, our question would be, does this guarantee that all people do these things? No. But even if one or two or five people, five families, five staff members, three administrators, if only a couple people change behavior, does that impact climate? Does that impact culture? Absolutely. So even these small changes consistently over time, these are what add up to real, holistic, consistent change. So in review, if you want to change culture, define your leaders. If you want to change culture, monitor climate. And if you want to change culture, create champions, people who have opportunities to consistently dig into the work and role model what that behavior change looks like for others. A lot of information in a short period of time. Thanks for sticking around with me. And I tell you all that to tell you this. What I'm sharing here today is a very, very small sampling of our long form 7-hour or beyond 1 and or 2 day educator trainings that we host. Our trainings are currently always hosted by myself and my co-founder, John Norland. One of us will be running those trainings, and we'll give you the best we got. John from his experience in the classroom and at the district level, myself from my experience working in 600 schools all around the country, and from both of our perspectives now with CharacterStrong, working with over 1,500 schools globally. So we take all that information and we say, what's the very best content that we can provide educators, any type of educator who is passionate about changing their school for the better, right? How do we create more safe, positive schools where people want to be? How do we create a learning environment where academically people are successful, but also socially people feel included and worthwhile and important? Because when we get really good at the culture, when we get really good at focusing on that plate, everything we put on top of it gets better. And we've had some really cool positive feedback from these days. I know just yesterday I was in Racine, Wisconsin with 70 educators from the region. And a woman came up to me at the end. This is literally yesterday. She said, "This is the best training I've attended in 16 years. And I'm not just buttering you up." I was like, I don't know what you're buttering me up for, but also thank you so much. We get feedback like this with consistency that people are really moved, because I think we do an effective job combining personal and professional development, and really thoughtfully trying to combine the why for this work, right? The fuel in the tank, with the how, the practical strategies to actually bring this to life and make an impact right away in your school. The day itself is a combination, we say, of philosophy and practice. So we'll alternate between things like sort of paradigm shifts, like I offered today around leadership. And once we spend a little bit of time thinking about that on a foundational philosophical level, right, that paradigm, how we look at a thing first is going to shape how we behave in that thing. And then we dig into those behaviors through our signature serve model, which is simply a framework to really thoughtfully approach adult behavior practices and relational techniques. We say it's the most effective way, or the framework, to weave social emotional learning and character development into the daily fabric of what we do. So that is what our 1 day and 2 day educator trainings are focused on. And we have found them to be really successful when a school sends a team, usually to start their first time, a team of 3 to 5. That's usually an administrator. That's usually a counselor, a teacher leader, student council advisor, one of those core teams who is thinking about behavior, who's thinking about SEL, who's thinking about character development, who's thinking about culture, a tier 1 team. Those are the types of people that we have at our trainings. And that being said, we also have bus drivers, secretaries, superintendents, district employees, because we know that culture is all hands on deck. So we would love to have you learn more about our trainings. In fact, we would love for you to join us at them. They look fun, don't they? Look at this woman. She's having so much fun. She's having fun. And this guy's definitely having fun. Not only are we having fun, but it's also one of the most intentionally practical resource-packed days or 2 days that you can imagine. So that being said, I want to send out an offer for those of you who are here live today, and it'll be good for the next 48 hours. Next 48 hours, if you were to sign up today using the code CSTraining30, will get you 30% off any registration you have. It's CS Training 30 will get you 30% off any training you have. And for those of you who are here live right now, the first 3 people to email Dalton@CharacterStrong.com, first 3 people to email Dalton@CharacterStrong.com will get a free registration. I'll say that one more time, just in case you tuned out for a moment. The first 3 people to email Dalton@CharacterStrong.com will get a free registration to one of our one-day trainings. And anyone who emails Dalton@CharacterStrong.com will get access to our staff, our admin, and our family character dare set. So go ahead and drop Dalton an email today. And if you're one of the first 3, we'll get you hooked up with a free registration. And hopefully you bring some more. Thank you all for tuning in today. My name's Houston, one of the co-founders of CharacterStrong, and we look forward to seeing you at one of our trainings upcoming. We have them all over the country, hopefully in a spot near you. And if it's not in a spot near you, send us a note. We'd love to bring one to your neighborhood to get change, culture change happening.